In the early years of the post-war boom, the United States stood at the center of the industrial world. The factories that had powered victory in World War II did not shut down when peace arrived. They adapted, expanded, and fed a consumer revolution. Steel mills burned through the night in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Auto plants in Michigan pushed out millions of vehicles a year. Shipyards, chemical complexes, machine tool workshops, and appliance manufacturers formed a dense industrial network that stretched across the Midwest and Northeast. Manufacturing was not simply a sector of the economy, it was the backbone of national strength and middle-class stability. For millions of Americans, factory work represented a predictable path to prosperity. A high school diploma was often enough. Wages were strong, unions were influential, and benefits included pensions and health care coverage. Entire communities were organized around single employers. Tax bases were stable, local businesses thrived, and suburban expansion reflected confidence in long-term employment. Industrial labor carried dignity and status. It built highways, funded public schools, and supported a social contract rooted in steady growth. Yet even at the height of this confidence, structural changes were unfolding quietly. The global landscape was no longer frozen in the aftermath of war. Western Europe and Japan rebuilt their industrial systems with modern equipment and updated production methods. Their factories were newer, more energy efficient, and often more flexible. Competition that had been temporarily absent began to return. American producers, accustomed to dominance, suddenly faced rivals capable of matching quality, while sometimes undercutting costs. Technological evolution also began reshaping the factory floor. Automation did not arrive overnight, but it advanced steadily. Numerical control machining, early robotics, and computer-assisted processes reduced the need for large numbers of manual workers. Productivity increased, even as employment growth slowed. A single machine could perform tasks that previously required several skilled operators. Managers embraced efficiency gains, but for workers, these innovations introduced uncertainty. The connection between rising output and rising employment weakened. Rising costs added further strain. Strong unions negotiated higher wages and improved benefits, securing important gains for workers but increasing long-term obligations for companies. Pension commitments accumulated. Environmental regulations required costly upgrades. Safety standards improved conditions inside plants, but also raised expenses. None of these changes alone caused decline, yet together they narrowed profit margins in industries that were already becoming more competitive globally. Energy shocks amplified vulnerabilities. When oil prices surged, heavy industry felt the impact immediately. Steel production, automobile manufacturing, and chemical processing depended on affordable energy. Increased fuel costs rippled through supply chains, raising transportation expenses and consumer prices. Inflation accelerated while growth slowed, producing a destabilizing mix that economists struggled to control. Industrial firms faced shrinking demand at home while contending with agile foreign competitors abroad. At the same time, transportation innovations transformed global trade. Container shipping dramatically reduced the cost of moving goods across oceans. Production no longer had to remain geographically close to consumers. Corporations began exploring relocation strategies, first shifting operations within the country to regions with lower labor costs and weaker union presence, and later looking overseas. The logic was straightforward. If identical products could be produced more cheaply elsewhere, shareholders would expect management to pursue that path. Corporate culture itself evolved. Earlier generations of executives often viewed their firms as long-term institutions intertwined with specific communities. Gradually, a stronger emphasis on shareholder returns reshaped priorities. Financial performance metrics gained prominence. Quarterly results mattered more. Cost reduction became a central strategy rather than a secondary consideration. Factories were evaluated not only as sources of employment, but as assets to be optimized, consolidated, or divested. The social effects appeared slowly but unmistakably. Layoffs, once rare in major industrial hubs, became more common. Younger workers could no longer assume that employment at a single plant would last decades. Some facilities reduced shifts, others closed permanently. When a major employer shut its doors, the consequences extended far beyond its workforce. Local diners, hardware stores, and service providers lost customers. Municipal revenues declined. School funding suffered. Confidence eroded. Urban centers that had symbolized industrial might began to struggle with population loss. Middle-class families relocated in search of new opportunities, often leaving behind aging infrastructure and shrinking tax bases. Housing values stagnated or declined. Public services faced budget cuts. The physical signs of strain, like shuttered storefronts, idle machinery, and empty warehouses, became visible markers of a broader transition. Importantly, output did not collapse in proportion to employment. The United States continued to manufacture vast quantities of goods. What changed was the relationship between production and labor. Technological efficiency meant fewer workers were required per unit of output. The economy gradually tilted towards services, finance, healthcare, and emerging technology sectors. For highly educated individuals, new opportunities expanded. For workers without advanced credentials, the path to stable, well-paying employment narrowed. The psychological dimension of this shift cannot be overstated. For decades, industrial work had provided a sense of permanence. Parents expected their children to find similar stability. As that assumption weakened, anxiety replaced confidence. Labor management relations grew more adversarial. Strikes intensified as unions attempted to defend wages and benefits against forces that were often international and technological rather than local. Political debates grew sharper, reflecting frustration over trade policy, corporate decision-making, and economic inequality. This period did not mark a sudden collapse, but rather a turning point. The foundations of post-war industrial supremacy were being reshaped by global integration, technological innovation, shifting corporate incentives, and macroeconomic turbulence. The changes were gradual enough to avoid immediate catastrophe, yet significant enough to alter long-term trajectories. What once appeared permanent revealed itself to be contingent. In retrospect, these years represent the beginning of a profound transformation. The United States remained an industrial power, but its dominance was no longer unquestioned. Manufacturing ceased to function as the primary engine of middle-class expansion. Communities built around single industries confronted an uncertain future. Policymakers grappled with balancing open markets and domestic stability. Economists debated whether the shift toward services signaled progress or decline. Deindustrialization, in its early form, was less dramatic than later decades would make it seem. It unfolded through incremental decisions, evolving technologies, and intensifying global competition. Yet the cumulative effect was powerful. Expectations changed. Employment patterns shifted. Regional disparities widened. The economic model that had defined mid-century prosperity began giving way to something more complex and less predictable. By the end of this transitional era, it was clear that the industrial landscape had entered a new phase. Factories still operated, steel was still poured, and cars still rolled off assembly lines. But the guarantees that once accompanied industrial employment had weakened. The social contract built on stable manufacturing wages was under strain. What followed in subsequent decades would accelerate these trends. But the origins of that transformation lay in this earlier moment, when confidence yielded to competition, and permanence gave way to adaptation. If you liked this video and want to explore more stories, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There is always more history to uncover, and every lesson from the past helps us understand the world we live in today. See you soon.